The first thing Captain Clive Penner saw when the airlock hissed open on the orbital station of Velmira 3 was a row of towering, blue-scaled sentients aiming plasma rifles directly at his face. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't even blink. Instead, he calmly unclipped the leash from his belt and said, "Sit, Murphy." The golden retriever at his side, fluffy, panting, tail wagging like a metronome on espresso, immediately plopped onto the cold metal floor, tongue lolling out in a joyous grin. The rifles didn't lower. One of the aliens stepped forward, 8 feet tall, shoulders like a dock crane, and a face that looked like someone had tried to chisel a crocodile out of ice. A translator module hanging from its neck buzzed to life. That creature is not authorized. Clive barely looked up. He's my therapy animal. The alien glanced at Murphy, who let out a happy bark and rolled over, belly exposed. The alien stepped back. "Your therapy apex predator?" it asked. Clive scratched behind Murphy's ear. "He's a golden retriever, genetically incapable of aggression. Wouldn't hurt a fly." Murphy barked again, then sneezed. 2 of the guards flinched. Clive sighed. "Look, I get it. You're not used to dogs. But he's not a threat. He's certified by the Interstellar Behavioral Council. You want the paperwork?" The alien's eyes narrowed into slits. "It is irrelevant. The High Assembly has declared that no biological weapons be brought onto the station." "He's not a weapon," Clive exclaimed. "He's a walking pile of fluff who cries if I leave him alone for 2 hours. He's afraid of cucumbers." Murphy sneezed again, then rolled upright and trotted toward the nearest alien, tail wagging furiously. The guard raised his weapon. "Don't!" Clive barked, stepping forward. But Murphy only sniffed the alien's foot, let out a delighted bark, and gently leaned his entire weight against the being's leg. The alien froze. Clive sighed. "That's how he says hello." The alien looked down, then up again. "It is? Asserting dominance?" "No, he just likes you." The standoff continued for 10 more seconds. Then the lead guard gave a reluctant grunt and gestured toward the corridor. "You will be escorted. The creature will remain 2 meters from any personnel at all times." "Fine," Clive muttered. "Come on, Murphy." The dog bounced to his feet and trotted after him, tail high, tongue lolling. As they walked, Clive glanced sideways at the lead guard. "So, what were you expecting when I stepped off the shuttle? A bloodthirsty earth beast with venomous fangs?" The alien's expression didn't change. "Your species has a reputation." Clive chuckled. "Yeah, I've heard." The Velmaron High Assembly Chamber looked like a cathedral built by engineers with too much time and too little taste. Gleaming chrome arches stretched over a floor of transparent crystal, beneath which 100,000 meters of open sky dropped to the planet below. Clive stood at the center podium, Murphy sitting dutifully at his feet. The assembly members, over 60 alien species, watched him in silence. Some had eyes. Some didn't. Some floated. One jellyfish-like being hovered mid-air, humming softly. Ambassador Turral, a leathery green creature with 6 arms and a gaze like a disappointed librarian, addressed him. "Captain Penner, you were summoned here to explain the incident on Zarneth 5. Clive straightened. "Yes, ma'am, I have my report ready." She gestured. "Proceed." He tapped his wrist pad. A holo screen appeared, showing a grainy video of a rocky wasteland. A mining outpost appeared, then a sudden explosion. Screams, panic, and then Murphy barreling into frame, tail wagging, dragging a wounded miner by the collar to safety. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Clive cleared his throat. That was the first evac. He went back 7 more times, pulled 3 miners from collapsed tunnels, found the fusion capacitor before it reached critical, carried it out in his mouth. The jellyfish hummed louder. "And the creature that caused the collapse?" Turral asked. Clive nodded. "A burrower, about 4 meters long, fangs like spears. Murphy chased it off." The assembly erupted in noise. Some voices were skeptical, others outraged. Several beings looked genuinely disturbed. Turral raised one hand. "You mean to tell this assembly that your earth animal, a golden retriever, engaged a Class 7 subterranean predator and survived? Clive looked down at Murphy. The dog looked up and wagged his tail. Well, he barked at it. A lot. Then it ran. I think it got confused, or maybe allergic. Silence. Tyrrell leaned forward. You claim this creature is a therapy animal, yet it performs acts of warfare. He's not a soldier, Clive said firmly. He's trained to detect anxiety, assist with PTSD, and remind me to take my meds. Just happens to be ridiculously brave. And absurdly durable, Tyrrell added. The footage shows the creature being struck by debris. Clive nodded. Yeah, he limped for a day, then he was fine. Tyrrell's eyes narrowed. We have had incidents, other species attempting to weaponize fauna. You must understand our concern. I do, Clive said, but Murphy isn't a weapon. Murphy barked at the word and sat up straight, tail thumping. Tyrrell stared at the dog for several seconds. There will be an inquiry. Clive bowed slightly. Understood. Later, in the station's medbay, Clive sat on an exam table while a medic scanned his shoulder. You fractured the clavicle, the medic muttered. When did that happen? Zarnith 5, Clive said. During the collapse? You didn't seek treatment? I had to get the team out. Murphy found most of them. The medic looked at the dog, who was currently licking the face of a small Velmiran child. The child squealed with delight. The medic shook his head. You know, we've had apex predators before. Bioengineered killing machines, stealth hunters, sonic shriekers, but never this. Clive shrugged, then winced. He's not like most apex anything, just built different. Murphy trotted over and gently laid his head on Clive's lap. You're not even supposed to be here, Clive muttered. Murphy licked his hand. The next day, Clive was summoned again. This time, to the Biodome. The Biodome was a high-security research section filled with alien flora and fauna. Apparently, Murphy had wandered in earlier that morning and interacted with several species. Clive found him lounging in a patch of Bioluxian moss. 5 alien creatures snuggled up to him. One of them was a spiny hedgehog-lizard hybrid that normally hissed at anything within 5 meters. He just walked in, the researcher explained. Every creature in that dome either hides or attacks anything new, but with him, they just curled up. Clive looked at Murphy, who looked disturbingly proud of himself. He's got a gift, Clive said. The researcher frowned. We analyzed his pheromones. He emits calming signals. We thought it was a malfunction. Then we tested it on ourselves. And I haven't had a panic attack in 3 years. I had one yesterday. He licked my hand. It stopped. Clive raised an eyebrow. You sure it's not just placebo? We're scientists. We don't believe in placebos. Murphy barked. 2 weeks later, the inquiry concluded. Murphy was declared a biologically non-hostile companion entity and granted unrestricted access to the station's public zones. The Velmirans even issued him a badge. Clive stared at it. You gave my dog diplomatic credentials? Tyrrell blinked. It was the only way to process his activity through our legal code. I don't even have diplomatic credentials. You were categorized as handler. Murphy barked and licked Tyrrell's hand. The alien stared at her own fingers. I felt warmth. Yeah, Clive said. That's kind of his thing. A month later, the situation changed. A freighter entered Velmira 3's orbit. It didn't respond to hails. Then, it detonated. The shockwave damaged 2 orbital tethers. The biodome was breached. Containment fields failed. 10 species of aggressive life forms got loose. Clive was in the hangar when it happened. Alarms blared, crews shouted, emergency lights turned everything red. Seal the dome, someone yelled. Too late, another voice replied. Clive ran. Murphy was at his heels. They reached the biodome's blast door just as a shrieking mass of fur and teeth lunged through. Clive raised his sidearm. The thing jumped, and Murphy intercepted it midair. They tumbled. Clive saw fur, blood, claws. Then silence. When the dust cleared, Murphy stood panting beside the unconscious creature, a long scratch down his flank bleeding steadily. Clive dropped to his knees. "Murph! Hey!" Murphy wagged his tail once, then collapsed. Clive's heart stopped. "Medic," he screamed. 2 surgeries, and 5 days later Murphy opened his eyes. Clive wept. "You idiot," he whispered, stroking the dog's head. "You stupid, perfect idiot." Murphy blinked at him, licked his chin, and wagged his tail. The medic said he'd need a month to fully recover. Clive cleared his schedule. The station's inhabitants visited daily. The jellyfish being hovered beside his bed for 20 minutes, humming softly. Tyrrell brought him a blanket woven from her people's sacred fibers. "He saved us," she said simply. Clive nodded. "Yeah, that's what he does." Murphy sneezed. Tyrrell stepped back. "Still intimidating." Clive laughed. "That's his secret. He doesn't try, he just is." And so the creature they'd once called an apex predator became something else entirely on Velmyra 3. A legend, a hero, a very good boy. The first thing Clive noticed when Murphy really woke up, was the eyes. Not the lazy blinking or dream-fogged glances from before, but the focused, alert gaze of a dog who had decided the nap was over and the day had officially begun. He stood at the edge of the recovery ward's isolation chamber, his face pressed against the glass, watching as Murphy sat up on the padded mat and gave a single, purposeful tail thump. A nurse Grillari, species Vassian, height 2 meters, temperament perpetually unimpressed, tapped her data slate at the terminal beside him. "He's alert. Vitals are within acceptable range." He refused the protein paste again. "He always does," Clive said. "It smells like boiled pond scum." Grillari blinked her 3 outer eyelids independently. "It is formulated for optimal recovery. It doesn't mean it's edible." She gave him a sideways glance, then entered a note on the slate. "You may enter, but keep your movements slow. He's still metabolizing the clot accelerant." Clive stepped through the sliding partition. The air inside was filtered, slightly too dry and faintly antiseptic. Murphy's ears perked up, and as Clive approached, he leaned forward with a soft groan and rested his head on Clive's knee. "Hey, buddy," Clive whispered, brushing along the bandage tucked behind Murphy's shoulder. "You scared the hell out of me." Murphy licked his hand once, then slumped back down and let out a long, satisfied sigh. Grillari's voice buzzed over the intercom. "He is displaying oxytocin response. That is a favorable indicator. You could just say he's happy to see me. That would be imprecise." Clive chuckled and sat cross-legged on the floor, letting Murphy stretch out across his lap. "You've got no idea what kind of vacation you turned into a circus while you were napping." Murphy sneezed once and looked up at him expectantly. "Yeah, I figured you'd want to be filled in." Outside the chamber, the station hadn't exactly returned to normal. Sector G was still sealed off, and half of the maintenance droids had been reassigned to dome reconstruction. The Biodome creatures that hadn't fled were being sedated and relocated, and Clive had personally received 3 separate requests from alien scholars asking to borrow Murphy for behavioral analysis. He'd refused all 3. Ambassador Tyrrell actually tried to draft a motion to classify you as a non-sentient diplomat, Clive said, scratching behind Murphy's ear. They were 2 votes short. Murphy's tail flopped once against the floor. "Not joking. There was a delegate from the Sulvan Combine who said you demonstrated the unilateral capacity to stabilize multi-species psychological tension through non-verbal engagement. I think that's alien speak for he gives good cuddles." A soft chiming interrupted him. Grillari stepped into the chamber holding a small, translucent vial. "Time for his 3rd dose," she said, kneeling beside Murphy. "Hold him still." Clive gently laid a hand across Murphy's neck while Grillari inserted the auto-injector just beneath the scruff. Murphy didn't flinch. He didn't even glance at her. He's got a higher pain threshold than most of our combat medics, she muttered. Clive didn't reply. He was watching Murphy's eyes again. They didn't dart, they didn't fret. For all the chaos and injury, he was calm, centered, like the whole thing had been a minor inconvenience. "What's in that mix?" Clive asked. "Low-dose neural stabilizer, mild anti-inflammatory, and a suppressor to halt the foreign antigen response from the dome creature's saliva." "Wait, it bit him?" "Clawed him. But its dermal glands secrete a reactive compound. Without the suppressor, he'd be in anaphylaxis." Clive swallowed. "And you didn't think to mention that before?" "I did. You were preoccupied weeping into his fur." Clive didn't argue. Murphy yawned, then laid his head back down. A soft hiss came from the door panel. Another visitor. Toril entered, flanked by 2 Valmiran aides and a floating orb that translated in real time. "Captain," she said, nodding, "I was informed he's stable." "He's more than stable. He's already bored." Toril stepped closer. Murphy lifted his head slightly, sniffed the air, then flopped back down. "I wish to propose something," Toril said, folding her hands. "An experiment." Clive raised an eyebrow. "If it involves sticking electrodes to my dog, the answer's no." Turil's head tilted slightly. "Your species and mine, we possess vastly different neurological frameworks, but your companion seems able to exert a calming effect across that divide. I wish to test this non-invasively." Define non-invasively. "We have a group of juvenile Valmirans undergoing cognitive stabilization therapy. They are reactive, difficult to soothe. If your companion can enter their proximity and reduce their stress levels without restraint or command, it would confirm the theory that his presence alone is neurologically impactful." Clive glanced at Murphy. "He's barely out of surgery." "It would be supervised. Limited to 10 minutes, no physical contact, unless initiated by the juveniles." Clive hesitated. Murphy looked at him, wagged his tail once, and whined softly. Clive exhaled. "You're volunteering, huh?" Murphy's eyes didn't waver. Grolari checked the injector's readout. Medically, he can tolerate light interaction. No running, no stairs, no loud auditory stimuli. Toril nodded. "We will begin immediately." 20 minutes later, Clive and Murphy entered a chamber lined with soft, textured walls and low lighting. Inside, 5 young Valmirans huddled in separate corners, their skin tones pulsing with erratic bioluminescence. None looked up. Toril remained outside, observing through a one-way partition. Murphy padded forward, slow and deliberate. He paused once, sniffed the air, then wandered to the nearest juvenile, a small, hunched figure trembling beneath a curved panel. The child didn't react. Murphy sat, waited. After nearly a full minute, the juvenile's breathing slowed. Its posture shifted. Then, without warning, it reached out and laid a hand against Murphy's side. The glow in its skin steadied. Then another child approached. Then another. Within minutes, Murphy was buried beneath a heap of Valmiran limbs and glowing tendrils, his tail barely visible beneath the pile. Clive stood frozen, watching through the glass. Turil's voice came over the intercom. "We've never seen them initiate collective touch without coercion." Clive didn't answer. "Captain?" He cleared his throat. "He's just doing what he's always done. You're the ones making it weird." The session ended 12 minutes later. Murphy emerged from the tangle, damp with alien drool and covered in static cling. He didn't seem to mind. Clive rubbed him down with the towel and offered him a strip of dehydrated meat from his pocket. "You just made 4 psychologists cry," he muttered. "One of them shorted out their tablet." Murphy licked his fingers. Later that evening, Clive sat in his quarters, reviewing the daily reports. Murphy lay across the foot of the bed, snoring softly. The station had quieted. Even the usual background hum of the reactors felt subdued, like the whole place had taken a breath. A soft ping drew Clive's eyes to the comms console. A message from the Sylvan Combine's health directorate. They were requesting a formal visit. Not for Clive, for Murphy. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "You are officially more popular than me." he muttered. Murphy let out a contented sigh and resumed snoring. Clive shook his head and tapped the console. Decline, with respect. He looked over at his dog. You're not a specimen, you're family. Murphy's tail gave a single, lazy thump. Outside, the stars wheeled silently past the viewport, unbothered by species, politics, or the fact that one golden retriever had just become the most inexplicably effective emotional stabilizer in the quadrant. And for now, that was enough. Clive was elbow deep in a panel of tangled cabling beneath the station's hydroponics control grid when the announcement came over the comms. All personnel in sectors D through F, be advised. A Level 1 diplomatic delegation from the Irxi conclave will be arriving at docking ring 2 in 11 minutes. Security presence is mandatory. No exceptions. He exhaled hard. Of course it's Irxi. Why wouldn't it be? A maintenance drone hovered behind him, chirping uncertainly. Yeah, I'll finish the bypass later, Clive muttered, wiping his hands on a rag. Let's go make some intergalactic friends. By the time he reached the docking ring, the security team had already formed a loose semicircle around the airlock. All of them wore polished armor, though most looked like they'd been pulled from unrelated assignments and told to look official. Turl was there too, her posture tighter than usual, flanked by a delegation aide with a datapad and the floating translator orb she'd affectionately nicknamed Bubble. Clive fell into step beside her. You didn't mention Irxi were coming. They did not announce in advance. They rarely do. Murphy sat patiently at Clive's heel, eyes alert but relaxed. He tilted his head toward the airlock and gave a low huff. Taral glanced down. Is that a warning? Nope, he doesn't do warnings. That's his interesting smell noise. The airlock cycled open with a mechanical groan. Out stepped 6 Irxi, tall and narrow, with segmented limbs and iridescent plates that shimmered in the station lights like oil slicks. Their eyes were compound, their mandibles twitching in sync with each other. They moved with unsettling coordination, pausing in perfect formation just beyond the threshold. The leader stepped forward. Its translator unit clicked on. We request audience with the one designated Penner Clive. The entity known as Murphy is to be present. Clive looked sideways at Toril. Did I miss a memo? They sent no prior communique. You are named directly. Murphy stood, tail wagging once. Clive stepped forward. That's me. What's this about? The Irxi leader emitted a series of sharp clicks before the translator caught up. We observed your companion during the Velmarin recovery broadcast. Our science division has questions. Questions like what? The Irxi took a step closer. A second one flared its wings slightly, the motion exposing an array of sensory filaments along its thorax. How does the Apex unit achieve non-aggression dominance within multi-species environments? Is it chemically induced or biologically innate? Murphy blinked and sat back down, unconcerned. Clive resisted the urge to laugh. You're asking how my dog makes friends? The Apex unit engaged in direct physical contact with a high-threat juvenile Velmir cluster and produced systemic de-escalation without deploying threat displays or pheromone suppression. This is outside expected parameters. Turl interjected. We have already determined Murphy's presence is therapeutic in nature. The Irxi leader turned its entire upper body toward her. Therapeutic designation does not explain the neurological effect radius. We detected measurable reduction in cortical agitation from 4 sectors away. Clive frowned. You were scanning my dog? Passive observation, no harm intended. He looked down at Murphy. You okay with being a scientific curiosity? Murphy licked his nose. The Irxi leaned in, close enough that Clive instinctively shifted his body between them and the dog. We request a demonstration, controlled conditions, immediate execution. Clive raised both hands. Whoa, okay, first of all, Murphy's not a lab rat. Second, you don't just show up unannounced and demand a performance like he's some kind of circus act. Trawl placed a hand on his shoulder. Captain, perhaps a compromise. The Irxi leader clicked once. Clive glanced at her. What kind of compromise? There is a containment simulation chamber on Deck H. It was used during the pathogen drills last cycle. No threat, fully monitored, and neutral ground. If Murphy consents, the Irxi may observe. Murphy gave a soft boof and stood up, wagging his tail once. Clive sighed. I guess that's a yes. The chamber was cold and low-ceilinged, walls made of transparent alloy, lit by indirect blue panels. The Irxi filled the observation gallery with silent precision, deploying instruments from their own bodies. One extended a telescopic lens from beneath its chest plate, another unfolded a lattice of antennae from its back. Clive stood inside the chamber with Murphy, who trotted over to the far wall and flopped down like it was just another nap spot. The lead Irxi's voice piped through the speaker. We will introduce a variable now. The opposite door opened and a small creature scurried inside. It was roughly the size of a domestic cat with spiny fur and luminous red eyes. It hissed at the overhead lights, then spun to face Murphy. Clive tensed. What is that? Zarathian stressor species. Non-lethal, reactive to emotional dissonance. The creature darted toward Murphy, snapping the air with needle-like teeth. Murphy stood slowly, blinked, and lowered his head to sniff it. The Zarathian froze. Murphy sat, then laid down, then rolled onto his back and offered his belly. The Zarathian stared, then cautiously approached. It sniffed his nose. Murphy licked its face once. The Zarathian collapsed beside him. Clive folded his arms. You done? The Irxi took longer to respond than expected. This defies expected behavior. Further variables required. Nope, you got your show. He's not a toy. The door cycled open. Murphy stood and padded back to Clive's side. He gave the Zarathian a parting nudge with his nose before exiting. Back in the corridor, Clive crouched and checked Murphy's paws. You good? Murphy sneezed twice and shook himself out. Turl joined them, arms tucked tightly. I suspect the Irxi will file a formal report. They can write all the reports they want. He's not going into a box. Later that evening, Clive sat in the station's communal mess. A bowl of something that resembled chili con carne sat untouched in front of him. Murphy lay curled beneath the table, head resting on Clive's boot. Across the room, a group of Albanian engineers watched them with open curiosity. One approached, a tall, willowy figure with translucent skin and a voice like wind through reeds. Is it true your companion diffused an Irxi interrogation without vocalization? Clive exhaled, rubbing his forehead. He just laid down, that's all. The Albanian tilted their head. Fascinating. We attempted to interface with the Irxi once. They declared our presence unstructured. Murphy perked up as the Albanian knelt and extended a hand. He sniffed it, then leaned forward and gently licked the extended fingers. The Albanian blinked several of their eye clusters in succession. I feel slightly less anxious. Clive finally smiled. Yeah, that's kind of his thing. 3 days later, the Irxi left the station. Their final report, forwarded via encrypted channel, was 54 pages long and included phrases like unmodeled empathy response cascade and unquantifiable tranquility field. Murphy didn't seem interested in any of it. He spent most of the day stretched out in a patch of filtered sunlight near the Arboretum's west window, occasionally rolling over to chase phantom specks of dust in the air. Clive sat beside him, legs outstretched, arms folded behind his head. Turl visited briefly, offering a small container made of woven bark. Inside were dried fish flakes, infused with a plant used in Velmiran rituals. Your companion's influence continues to ripple, she said. Clive took the container. You know he's not doing it on purpose, right? I believe that is what makes it remarkable. Murphy yawned, then dropped his head onto Clive's lap. You think he knows? Clive asked. What he's doing to all these species? Turl watched in silence for a long moment. I think he knows you're happy, and that is enough for him. Clive ran a hand through the golden fur. Yeah, I think you're right. The sun shifted. The station hummed, and for the first time in weeks, nothing needed fixing, explaining, or defending. Murphy wagged his tail once. Everything was fine.